You're listening to the Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent talk.
Almost all the way through the week. Welcome to my show. This is Scotty Roberts. You're listening to the Intrepid radio program right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. That's ODYSY1.com. Go on over and see all the goodness that is Odyssey Radio and find out all the outlets where you can hear this show and check out the schedule of all the shows they have on board for you to listen to all throughout the day, 24/7. Now, you can also, during this broadcast, come on over to my YouTube channel, watch the video simulcast, join the live chat room going on right now, meet other people in the Intrepid family, put your 2 cents worth into the show, go on over to youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. Apparently, I haven't gotten too controversial for YouTube to start messing with my stream yet. So we're still up over there, and probably stay not too controversial over here, at least in the areas where most of the major social networks have decided to censor people. So far I haven't been censored, so far as I know. So come on over and enjoy. And that's a topic all by itself. By the way, because this is just sitting here staring me at the face, yesterday my wife and we went out and got some stuff at the garden center so we could work on our yard, putting in some flower beds and stuff like that, beautify the lawn a bit. You know, our lawn, they built this place. We were waiting for this place to, while it was being constructed, and it sits on a corner on a hill, coming uphill, and they had to level off this lot, and so they built it way up, and there's a big fake hill that they built. It was all dirt when they started. Then, of course, they spread it all. Well, that big mound would block the corner. We couldn't see the intersection, but it was full of weird grass and weeds growing out of it before they finally got to leveling the lawn. They leveled it out, and so we're on a hill, an artificial hill, that's full of rocks and all kinds of... They put some kind of weird crap on it to grow grass. And there's a facsimile of grass that grows on our lawn. It looks like a full lawn from about a block away, but you get up close and it's scrub. So we decided to dig up some of that, and it's full of rocks, and put in a flower bed about a third of the side of the yard that's all a slope. And so that's what we're working on. But we were out, and we ran by, we saw, sitting on the curb, somebody had cleaned their garage or something and had a bunch of stuff out. Take our shit, please. And so Rainey was digging through one of the bins, and she found this. I thought this was kind of interesting. I didn't vote for him, but look at this. Let's see if you can see that. Ventura for Minnesota. That's back when Jesse Ventura was running for governor and became the governor of the state of Minnesota. Head of state, it says. I don't know if you can see that. So it's kind of a neat little keychain. A little memorabilia from Minnesota politics about 20 plus years ago. So I found that. That's sitting on my desk. Thought I'd share that with you. It's kind of fun. Now, yesterday we started talking about the pillars of manhood. And you're going to see as we go through this little mini-series a bit how it's about manhood, but it also addresses femininity as well, or the feminine side of things. Now, I have stated outright several times over the last year how I don't believe, you know how people say when a man cries in a movie or when he shows his tender moments, oh, that's his feminine side coming out. Well, I've never believed that. I have always believed that feminine is feminine and masculine is masculine. And I don't think it's an insidious conspiracy plot or anything, but I think that there are people who promote radical feminism that would like to promote the idea that any man who shows anything that's not macho or things like that he's actually got the feminine part of his nature is coming out. I don't happen to believe that. I believe that biologically, physiologically, we are male and female. And there's nothing wrong with that. And there are certain aspects of our personalities that don't mesh, that don't cross over. And if a man is showing tenderness, or a man is showing love or care, that isn't feminine side coming out. That is his true masculinity. True masculinity encompasses not only what we would consider in that category of the machismo or the manly stuff and, beating our chests and killing animals and eating their hearts and things like that, but also true masculinity is displayed in tenderness. It's displayed in the things that make us even-keeled, balanced individuals, just like the female has her own things that make her. My wife, when she goes outside and she lifts a 50-bag pound of soil that she's gotten for the yard, and she unloads 10 of those from the car and doesn't let me, because she thinks, in my frail physical state, that I can't still lift things. But I can. The beach is that way. But so I let her do that, and she said, "Hold up the hatchback, which the hydraulic thing needs to be fixed." So just in the last week, the thing's flopping. So I stood there holding that, and she's Is that her masculine side showing through? Or does the true feminine also have its aspects that aren't male aspects at all, that aren't masculine sides at all? That she has, she has attitude. She has, my wife can tote the barge and lift the bale, if that's how that phrase goes. All that to say, that male and female are completely separate. They don't cross over. And that a woman, when she is showing masculine traits, or what we would call attributes of the male, isn't showing male attributes at all. She's displaying true femininity, true female nature. That a woman is just as your radical feminists would say, women are just as equal as men. A woman can do anything a man can do. And to a certain degree, that's true. Now, men are built bigger, tougher. Their skeletal structures, their muscle structure and all is built for doing physical things in a different way than a woman is. But then again, a woman is built for things like childbirth, which a man can't do. There are physical traits, biological traits, physiological traits that are unique to the genders, to the sexes. And so when I talk about masculinity, we're going to get into some of that. Maybe we'll hit some of that today. But I want to pick up where we left off yesterday. We were talking about patriarchy and how we call that boy psychology. Patriarchy is that overtly male-dominated system of operation. And it's not an expression of mature masculinity. And it's not pure masculine potential in its essence, in the fullness of being. We've come to this conclusion that patriarchy is true masculinity, meaning machismo, meaning the negative sides of masculine. And maybe so that's what they are. But studies and continuing studies have shown that ancient myths, modern dreams, from examination from inside the rapid feminization of the mainline religious community, from a reflection upon the rapid changes in gender roles over the last few decades, in our society as a whole, and from our years and years of accumulated clinical practice that can be hailed to in research, we have to become increasingly aware that something vital is missing in the inner lives of many men who are out there. And if they hail just to patriarchy alone, they are missing something. And what's missing isn't, for the most part, what many deep psychologists assume is missing, and that is adequate connection to the inner feminine. I don't think that's what's missing. I don't have to get in touch with my fictional feminine side. I don't think we have a feminine side to masculinity. In many cases, men that are out there seeking help from psychotherapy and stuff like that to try to get a grip on who and what they are, especially nowadays, is adequate connection to the deep and instinctual masculine energies, the potentials of mature masculinity. And they're being blocked from connection to these potentials by a system that they might support of patriarchy all by itself, by the feminist critique upon what little masculinity they could still hold on to for themselves. And they're being blocked by a lack in their lives of any meaningful and transformative initiatory process by which they could have achieved a sense of manhood. And as we found yesterday, one of the big things that's missing is initiating boys to men. There was always throughout human history, there was something where women initiated women, young girls into womanhood, men initiated young men into manhood. And we find that as men sought their own experience of masculine structures through meditation, prayer, and this is a little recap yesterday, but what the Jungians, you could say, the Jungian philosophy calls active imagination, that as they got more and more in touch with the inner archetypes of mature masculinity, that they were increasingly able to let go of their patriarchal self and other wounding thought, feeling, and behavioral patterns, and they become more genuinely strong, centered, generative toward themselves, toward others, both men and women. And in the present crisis in masculinity, we don't need, as some feminists are saying, less masculine power. We need more masculine power. And to insist that we need less of it is a pure and simple and clear illustration of what people do not understand about what masculinity is. We need more of the mature masculine. We need more man psychology. We need to develop a sense of calmness about the masculine power so we don't have to act out dominating, disempowering behavior toward others. Now, before we go any further, I want to make a note, as I did yesterday. I'm speaking primarily to men, but I'm stepping out of that box too and speaking to us all, men and women, to take a recognition of what this is all about. Now, my own wife, Rainey, yesterday said, she said, "Oh, well, that's nice. Are you going to do something on the pillars of femininity and all of that?" And I said, yes, I'm probably going to get there. I said, that's going to be wrapped up into this series, but don't fall into the trap of what society has taught us to believe just in the last few decades about masculinity and femininity. Yes, there can be an equal balance there. Yes, they juxtapose each other. Yes, they work in harmony with each other if it's done in a healthy way. Insisting that, just because we talk about men's stuff, we should be talking about women's stuff too. Well, I think it's all intertwined. When we talk about what is true masculinity, we are also, maybe without addressing it head on, defaulting to talking about what true femininity is as well. So women, if you're listening to this show, watching this show, you're part of it, join in and hear what this stuff is about, because this affects you too. This affects how you view the male in society, in humanity. This affects how you look at patriarchy, which is really the negative side of masculine. The immature masculine is what patriarchy is. And it should demonstrate to you, this whole series we're going to do, on what true masculinity is all about. And women, unless you live alone or you're lesbian or whatever it might be, that you don't have a lot of men in your life, maybe it doesn't matter that much to you, but maybe it's something you should take a look at and listen to and try to understand what our society has done to denigrate true masculinity, replacing it with a false narrative on what masculinity is supposed to be. So that's what we're going to do as we go on here. There's too much slandering and wounding of both the masculine and the feminine in patriarchy, as well as in the feminist reaction against patriarchy. The feminist critique, when it's not wise enough, actually further wounds an already besieged authentic masculinity. It may be that, in truth, there never has been a time yet in human history when mature masculinity or mature femininity was really in ascendancy. And we can't be sure of that. What we can be sure of is that mature masculinity is not in the ascendance today. And we need to learn to love and be loved by the mature masculine. That's where it hits us all. We need to learn to celebrate authentic masculinity, authentic masculine power, authentic masculine potency, not only for the sake of our personal well-being as men and for our relationships with others, but also because the crisis in mature masculinity feeds into the global crisis of survival we face as a species. Our dangerous and unstable world urgently needs mature men and mature women if our race is going to go on at all into the future. Because there's little or no ritual process in our society capable of boosting us from boy psychology into man psychology. We each must go on our own with each other's help and support to the deep sources of masculine energy, the potentials that lie within us all. And we have to find a way of connecting with these sources of empowerment. And hopefully, that's what we're going to try to achieve by going further in this little series. I don't know how long it'll last, how far we'll go. I'm just going as we go until we get through material and until we get the message across. So I want to look at from boy psychology to man psychology. What's involved in this? And there's a crisis, as I mentioned yesterday, in the masculine ritual process. We hear it said of men that he can't just get himself together. So what this really means on a deep level is that so-and-so is not experiencing and cannot experience his deep cohesive structures. Now, hail back a bit to what we talked about with Jungian philosophy, Jungian psychology. This is somebody who can't connect with the cohesive structures. This is how we view men. He's fragmented. Various parts of his personality are split off from each other and leading fairly independent and often chaotic lives. As I've said many times, men tend to compartmentalize. That's the way we are wired. That's a physiological thing. That we view life as a series of puddles. We jump from this puddle to that puddle to that puddle to that puddle, and none of them ever coalesce on the edges, while women are like streams. It all runs together. And so a man cannot get it together is a man who has probably not had the opportunity to undergo ritual initiation into the deep structures of manhood. He remains a boy. And not because he wants to, but because no one's shown him the way to transform his boy energies into man energies. And no one has led these men, into direct and healing experiences of the inner world of the masculine potentials. So when we visit caves, let's say, of our ancient ancestors, the distant Cro-Magnon ancestors in France, and you descend into the dark of those otherworldly and innerworldly sanctuaries, we light our lamps, we jump back in startled awe and wonder at the mysterious hidden well springs of masculine might that we see depicted on those cave walls. We feel something deep move within us. Here, in silent song, the magic animals, the bison, the antelope, the mammoth, all leap and thunder in this pristine beauty as they were crudely painted on these cave walls, and they force across the high vaulted ceilings and the undulating walls. I encourage you to go look up some of these cave paintings from France. And they move purposely into the shadows, purposefully, I guess I would say, into the shadows of the folds of the rock, and then they spring at us again in the light of our lamps. And here, painted with them, are the handprints of men, of the artist hunters, the ancient warriors and providers who met here and performed their primeval rituals. Anthropologists are almost universally agreed that these cave sanctuaries were created, at least in part, by men for men, and specifically for the ritual initiation of boys into the mysterious world of male responsibility and masculine spirituality. But ritual process for the making of men out of boys isn't limited to our conjectures about ancient cave paintings. As many scholars have shown, most notably among them Mircea Eliade and Victor Turner, the ritual initiatory process still survives in tribal cultures to this day, in Africa, in South America, in islands in the South Pacific, many other places. And it survived until very recent times among the Plains Indians of North America. And the study of ritual process by the specialist may tend toward dry, boring reading for most of us, but we can see it enacted colorfully in a number of contemporary movies. Movies are like ancient folklore and mythology. These are our modern ways of telling stories. And there are stories that we tell ourselves, about our lives, about their meaning. In fact, the initiatory process for both men and women is one of the great hidden themes of many of the movies we watch and we enjoy. And a good example, a good explicit example of this can be found in an older movie called The Emerald Forest. And here it's a white boy has been captured and raised by Brazilian Indians. And one day he's playing in the river with a beautiful girl, and the chief has noticed his interest in the girl for a long time. And this awakening of sexual interest in the boy is a signal to the wise chief. He appears on the riverbank with his wife and some of the tribal elders and surprises Tommy, the young boy, they call him Tomé, at play with the girl. And the chief booms out, "Tomé, your time has come to die." And everyone seems profoundly shaken, the chief's wife playing the part of all women, of all mothers, and asks, "Must he die?" And the chief threateningly replies, "Yes." Then we see a firelit nighttime scene in which Tommy is seemingly tortured by the older men of the tribe in mock torture. And forced into the forest vines, he's being eaten alive by jungle ants, and he writhes in agony, his body mutilated in the jaws of hungry ants, and we fear the worst. But finally the sun comes up, and there's something transformative that happens next. But we got to go out to break. We'll come back and we'll talk about this little ceremonial ritual process of changing boys to men when we come back. Sit tight. right, folks, thanks for sitting through that break. This is Scotty Roberts. You're listening to and watching the Intrepid radio program right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. That's ODYSY1.com. And you can also come on over to watch the video simulcast on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. Join the live chat room going on there right now as I'm speaking. Meet some of the other Intrepids and have a good time tonight. So we left off, we're talking about ritual and how ritual and ceremony in the transformation of boys to men has been something that's been present since the days of cave paintings with the Cro-Magnon ancestors. And we're talking about this movie, just hitting on this as an example, movies being the prime movement of history and mythology and learning in our day and age, just as much as books are, maybe even more so at some points. People watch movies sometimes nowadays before they read a book. But in this movie, The Emerald Forest, it's about a young white boy that is stranded and captured by Brazilian Indians out in the jungles, and he's raised, and the chief sees him playing with the young girl of the tribe out in the river, and he suddenly declares, "It is the day for you to die." And the women all in kind of mock, "Oh, must he die?" And they put him through a mock torture, and they put him out in the jungle at night. He's being bitten by ants, and as you're watching all this, you're fearing the worst for Tommy. Then finally, the sun comes up, and Tommy, still breathing, is taken down to the river by the men and bathed. The clinging ants are washed from his body. The chief then raises his voice and says, "The boy is dead and the man is born." And with that, Tommy's given his first spiritual experience, induced by a drug blown into a long pipe into his nose. He hallucinates, and in his hallucination discovers his animal soul, an eagle. And he soars above the world in a new and expanded consciousness, drug-induced, of course, seeing as if from a God's eye view the totality of his jungle world. And then he's allowed to marry. Tommy is now a man. And as he takes on a man's responsibilities and identity, he's moved first into the position of a brave in the tribe, and then into a position, eventually, of chief. Now, it can be said that life's perhaps most fundamental dynamic is the attempt to move from a lower form of experience and consciousness to a higher one, or a deeper one, a deeper level of consciousness. We want to grow, we want to evolve in our lives from a diffuse identity to a more consolidated and structured identity. Now, I use the word evolve, and as I'm talking, I'm thinking the definition of evolution is mutation, mutating from one thing to the next thing. So, in symbolic ritual ceremonial death to the young boy, we are mutating as young men into a man, boy to man. But there is going to be that process of learning mature masculinity. All of human life at least attempts to move forward along all these lines, from this lower form to this higher form, into adult responsibilities, initiation into adulthood, adult joys, adult rights, and into adult spirituality. All forms of life move forward along those lines. Tribal societies had a highly specific notion about adulthood, both masculine and feminine, and how to get to it. And they had ritual processes like the one I mentioned in the movie, The Emerald Forest, to enable their children to achieve what we could call calm, secure masculinity. At least in that movie and in that small slice of humanity in the world, at least according to how their culture saw it. Now, our own culture has pseudo-rituals instead, fake rituals. There are many pseudo-initiations for men in our culture. Conscription into the military is one. Oh, you're a man now. You've joined the army. The fantasies that the humiliation and forced non-identity of boot camp is going to make a man out of you. And the gangs of our major cities are another manifestation of pseudo-initiation. And so are the prison systems, which in a large measure are run by gangs. And we call these phenomena pseudo-events for two reasons. For one thing, with the possible exception of military initiation, these processes, though sometimes highly ritualized, especially within city gangs, more often than not initiate the boy into a kind of masculinity that's skewed, that's stunted, that's false. It's a patriarchal manhood, one that is abusive of others and often of self. Sometimes a ritual murder is required of the would-be initiate. Usually the abuse of drugs is involved in the gang culture. The boy may become an acting out adolescent in these systems and achieve a level of development roughly parallel to the level expressed by the society as a whole in its boyish values, though in a contracultural form. But these pseudo-initiations are not going to produce mature men with mature masculinity, because real men are not wantonly violent. They're not wantonly hostile. Boy psychology is charged with the struggle for dominance of others, and in some form or another. And it's often caught up in the wounding of self as well as others. It's sadomasochistic. Man's psychology is always quite the opposite. It's nurturing. It's generative. It's not wounding. It's not destructive. So you can see where the confusion comes in our society. So in order for man's psychology to come into being for any particular man, there needs to be a death. He must die. Death, symbolic, psychological, or spiritual, however you want to look at it, is always a vital part of any initiatory ritual. In psychological terms, the boy ego has to die. The old ways of being and doing and thinking and feeling have to ritually die before the new man can emerge from that. Pseudo-initiation, though placing some curbs on the boy ego, often amplifies the ego's striving for power and control in a new form, an adolescent form, regulated by other adolescents. Effective, transformative initiation absolutely slays the ego, puts it to death, and its transformative initiation absolutely kills the boy in a metaphoric sense. And its transformative initiation absolutely slays the ego, puts it to death, and its desires in its old form to resurrect it with a new subordinate relationship to a previously unknown power or a center, a new focus. Submission to the power of the mature masculine energies always brings forth a new masculine personality that's marked by calm, compassion, clarity of vision, and generativity. And so a second factor that makes most initiations in our culture pseudo-initiations is in most cases that there simply is not a contained ritual process. Ritual process contained by two things. The first is a sacred space, and the second is a ritual elder, the wise old man or the wise old woman when it comes to mature femininity, who is completely trustworthy for the initiate and can lead the initiate through the process and deliver him or her intact and enhanced on the other side. Now, I want to insert a little story here that just popped into my head. It's part of my background. As many of you know, I grew up without a father in the home. We had no dad. And I bumped one day into an older man. I say older. He's the age I am now. He was 60 years older when I met him. And I was 11 years old. And my brother and I, on a Saturday, had been working for $5 for the whole day. We're talking, this is 1972. Yeah, I was 11 years old. 1972. We got paid $5 for the whole day to go work in a big truck garden, planting tomatoes, sitting on the back of a planter that would plant the tomatoes, and we'd have to run behind and, smooth out the dirt afterwards. And so we followed behind this tractor and came back, just caked in black soil. And but we had our $5, and it was my task. I got sent out on my bike a couple of blocks away to a little cafe called Lloyd's Cafe, or Lloyd's, I think it was, which isn't there anymore, to buy cheeseburgers and French fries with our $5. And of course, it only amounted to a couple of bucks back then, so we still had money left over. And while I'm sitting at the counter, it was one of those counters with the little round stools, just at an old 50s, 60s looking cafe. And I'm sitting there, I'm waiting for our burgers, drumming my fingers. And there's an older gentleman 2 seats down. He turns to me and goes, "Man, you're awfully dirty. How'd you get dirty like that?" And so I got to tell him, well, my brother and I, we did this and that. And I met this guy. He introduced himself as Bill. And he was drinking coffee. And a very tan-skinned, muscular guy with a huge smile. And what he was doing, he was out canvassing the neighborhoods for Sunday school at a big church in Minneapolis. And he was taking a little coffee break. And so he introduced himself. We got to talk, and he eventually asked me to go to church anywhere, Sunday school. No. And he invited me to come, and he was going to pick me up on the bus the next morning. Sure enough, big school bus came by Sunday morning. I was all ready, and I went to church. And I became that day a born-again Christian in a Baptist church. And so that's a little bit of my religious history. But what happened with Bill and I is we hit it off. He knew I didn't have a dad, and he was a fireplace builder and a stonemason. And so he would come and pick me up. We'd go out and, have ice cream or something. Then he asked my mom. My mom was looking for one of those big brothers for both my brother and I. The dad figures for kids who don't have dads, the Big Brothers organization. And Bill said to my mom, would it be okay if I become Scotty's big brother? And she was just fine with that. And so Bill took me under his wing. He taught me a lot of stuff I didn't get from a dad. He taught me how to build fireplaces, how to do stonemasonry and brickwork. And he paid me, and I was a kid that was making $10 an hour working for him on a Saturday in a time in 1972 and 73 and 74 when $10 an hour was unheard of, especially for a kid that age. So I was kind of rolling in it. I'd make maybe $40, $50 a week, and that was about it. And so anyway, all of that put aside, he mentored me in many ways. We'd go camping together. We'd do all kinds of stuff together. And then when I was in early high school in 1976, he passed away. He had cancer, prostate cancer. And I remember losing him was like losing a dad, because that is what he had become. And so there's always, in sacred space, there's a ritual elder, a wise old man or a wise old woman that's completely trustworthy for the initiate. Somebody who can initiate a process and deliver the initiate, him or her, intact and enhanced on the other side. This is the role that Bill played for me. And so, moving on, Mircea Eliade researched the role of sacred space extensively. And he concluded that space that has been ritually hallowed is essential to initiations of every kind. In tribal societies, this space can be specially constructed. It's a hut or it's a house in which the boys awaiting their initiation are held. It can be a cave, or it can be the vast wilderness into which the would-be initiate is driven in order to die or find his manhood. And the sacred space can be the magic circle of the magicians. Or as in a more advanced civilization, it can be the inner room in the precincts of a great temple. And this space has to be sealed from the influence of the outside world, especially in the case of boys, from the influence of women. Often the initiates are put through terrifying, emotional, and excruciatingly painful physical trials. They learn to submit to the pain of life, to the ritual elders, to the masculine traditions and the myths of the society, and they're taught all the secret wisdom of men. And they're released from the sacred space only when they've successfully completed the ordeal and been reborn as men. Now, the second essential ingredient for a successful initiatory process is the presence of the ritual elder. In the Emerald Forest, this is the chief and the other elders of the tribe. And the ritual elder is the man who knows this secret wisdom, who knows the ways of the tribe and the closely guarded men's myths. And he's the one who lives out of a vision of mature masculinity. And with scarcity in our current culture of mature men, it goes without saying that ritual elders are in desperately short supply. This pseudo-initiation remains skewed toward the reinforcement of boy psychology, rather than allowing for movement toward man's psychology. Even if some of the ritual processes still exist, and even if a kind of sacred space has been set up on the city streets or on the cell block. Now, we don't put our boys through nights in the jungle being eaten by ants for him to die, but there are other things that can be done, obviously. So the crisis in mature masculinity is very much upon us. We are beset by this crisis. Lacking adequate models of mature men and lacking the societal cohesion, the institutional structures for actualizing ritual process, it's every man for himself. I gotta say, too, this was one of my initial problems with girls being allowed to join Boy Scouts or Cub Scouts. Now, my daughter is a Cub Scout. She has been for a couple of years now. But I had initial problems with it because I thought, why is our society so against men mentoring boys into manhood? This is what Cub Scouts and Boy Scouts is supposed to be. Mentoring and creating, initiating boys to men. And so this is part of the crisis as we have it. And it's very much on us in our culture. Every man for himself. And most of us fall by the wayside with no idea that it was what it was that was the goal of our gender-driven, our gender drive, or what we went wrong in our strivings. We fall by the wayside because of this. We just know that we're anxious, on the verge of feeling impotent, helpless, frustrated, put down, unloved, unappreciated, boo-hoo-hoo, I know all that sounds that way, often ashamed of being masculine. You notice nowadays, you can't be masculine anymore if you're a man. Well, I'm sorry I'm so masculine. Maybe I'm not in tune with my femininity. See, I think that's the farce that we've been sold. We're ashamed of being masculine, mostly because we don't know what the hell real masculinity truly is. We just know that our creativity was attacked, that our initiative was met with hostility, that we're ignored, belittled, left holding the empty bag of lost self-esteem, blah, blah, blah. And we cave into this dog-eat-dog world, trying to keep our work and our relationships afloat, losing energy or missing the mark. And many of us seek the generative, affirming, and empowering father, though most of us don't know that's what it is, the father who for most of us never existed in our actual lives and won't ever appear, no matter how hard we try to make him appear, or no matter how many surrogates we put in the place of that father. However, as students of human mythology, me personally, as a student of history and mythology, and as a Jungian psychological adherent, I believe there is good news for men. And this good news for men as well as for women that we want to share, that I want to share, that we want to get in touch with. And this is what we're going to look at now in the few minutes we have left in this segment. Masculine potential. Those of us who've been influenced by the thinking of the great Swiss psychologist Carl Jung, we have a great reason to hope that the external deficiencies we've encountered in the world as would-be men, the absent father, the immature father, the lack of meaningful ritual process, the scarcity of ritual elders, can be corrected. And all we have to do is not just hope, but actual experience as individuals of inner resources, not imagined by psychology before Jung. And it's my experience that deep within every man lies the blueprint on what you call the hard wiring for the calm, positive, mature masculine. Jungians refer to these masculine potentials as archetypes or primordial images. Jung and his successors found that on a level of the deep unconscious, the psyche of every person is grounded in what Jung called the collective unconscious. Remember, we talked about that yesterday. The collective unconscious, made up of instinctual patterns and energy configurations, probably inherited genetically. It's in our DNA throughout the generations of our species. Now, these archetypes provide the very foundations of our behaviors, both as male, both as female, as just humans. Our thinking, our feeling, our characteristic human reactions to external stimuli around us. They're the image makers that artists and poets and religious prophets are so close to. Jung related them directly to the instincts of other animals. It's akin to the same thing. Most of us are familiar with the fact that baby ducks, soon after their hatch, attach themselves to whomever or whatever is walking by at the time. They impress themselves. And this phenomenon is called imprinting. Not imprinting is what I meant, not impressing. It's the imprinting. And it means that the newly hatched duckling is wired for mother or caretaker to be the first thing it attaches to. It doesn't have to learn from the outside as it were, what a caretaker is. It doesn't have to learn that. It's instinctually wired in. The archetype for caretaker comes online shortly after the duckling comes into the world. Unfortunately, however, the mother the duckling meets in those first moments may not be adequate to the task of taking care of the duckling. Nonetheless, although those in the outer world may not live up to the instinctual expectation, they may not even be ducks, the archetype for the caretaker forms the duckling's behavior. Now, in a similar way, human beings we are hardwired for mother and father, and many other human relationships, as well as all forms of the human experience of the world. And though those in the outer world may not live up to the archetypical expectation, the archetype is nonetheless present. It's a constant. It's a universal in all of us. We, like the duckling that mistakes a cat for its mother, mistakes our actual parents for the ideal patterns and potentials within us. You know, that brings to mind very quickly an example of somebody I know, young woman who got pregnant, participated in getting pregnant, let's put it that way, and refused to let the man in her life. I'm a woman, I can raise my son all on my own. And she eschewed having the male influence because she can do it on her own. What she neglected to realize or to understand was that every child is hardwired for a father and a mother. And now, you can call this good, you can call it bad. This young boy is now somebody who's struggling with transgenderism. Now, is that a direct result? I don't know. Is that hardwired into him as well? I don't know that either. All I know is that those two things happened within that relationship. And when a woman or a man says, I don't need a mother to raise my kids, I don't need a father to help me raise my kids, I can do this on my own, they're lopping off something that is hardwired into a child as a need. In a similar way, human beings are hardwired for mother and father, and many other human relationships, as well as all forms of human experience of the world. Archetypical patterns gone awry, skewed into the negative by disastrous encounters with living people in the outer world, that is, in most cases, by inadequate or hostile parents, manifest in our lives as crippling psychological problems. If our parents were, as psychologist D.W. Winnicott says, good enough, then we were enabled to experience and access the inner blueprints for human relations in a positive way. Sadly, many of us, perhaps the majority of us, did not receive enough good parenting. That doesn't mean it didn't exist. It just means receive enough of it. And we're out of time. We're going to pick up on this tomorrow, where we left off. Tomorrow's Friday. So 23-hour break right now. We'll be back. You guys sit tight. Thanks for being here tonight. See you tomorrow night.